Joining me now is longtime Democratic strategist James Carville. It's good to see you. I wanted to start. I mean, we've talked about this before, and you've said consistently that Biden really shouldn't focus on this. His campaign shouldn't focus on the trials. The campaign strategists, I think, agree with you, aside from a little fun they have on social media. Do you think, just given what polls say, that any of that changes in your view if Trump is convicted? We don't know what's going to happen, but if he's convicted.
Probably. I mean, I think this is a conscientious jury. I think we don't need to speculate. In another week or so, 10 days, we're going to have an answer. And that's going to, the jury's going to be interviewed, assuming they have a conviction. They're going to interview them. They're going to talk about it. They're going to talk about the evidence. They're not paying attention to all of the surrounding noise. According to the report I just listened to right up on your show, said that they're very engaged jurors. They're paying very close attention. That the judge is going to give them instructions. And I've just always been a big believer in our jury system. And whatever verdict they come up with is the verdict that I'm going to believe. But right now, there's nothing I can do about it. One way or another.
And we don't know how they'll decide. That's how it works. But if they decide he's convicted, we don't know if they will. Should the Biden team change their strategy, or you think they should stay full course, not talking about the trials?
Well, one thing to remember, Jen, when you're convicted of a felony, your whole life changes. He's got to be processed. They might take his passport away from him. They could limit his travel. I don't think they'll put him right in jail, but his life is going to change. And I don't know how we could put another log on this fire. It's raging. It's being covered everywhere. I don't know how much people care about it, but no, I completely agree with the White House strategist. Stay out of it. There's nothing to be gained here. Talk about reproductive rights. Talk about expanding health care. Talk about prescription drug price capping. Talk about the minimum wage. Talk about raising taxes on incomes over 400,000 people. These are all inherent popular positions that the president takes. Why talk about this guy now is 31,416 lies? Every day he lies. So I'm 100% behind their strategy. That no kerosene and no logs on this fire. It's raging out of control. And if he's convicted, you're going to have filing for appeal. You're going to have all kinds of things that are going to keep this story alive.
Yeah, no kerosene needed, I guess, to your point. The kerosene's happening. So let me ask you, let me ask you a question. I've been on a book tour, and I've talked to a lot of people out there, and the question people always ask me is about how, of course, they're Democrats and independents who ask me this, but how on earth is it possible that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are tied in the polls, given everything? What should I be saying? What do you say to people who ask you that question?
I'm trying to affect the outcome of the election. I can't rationalize things. I do know this. If the president talks about the Supreme Court, talks about taking rights away from people, talks about capping the price of prescription drugs, talks about the minimum wage, talks about the raising of taxes, he's going to do better. But I can't explain that 42% of American people think January 6th was a tourist visit. I mean, it's frustrating. It is, but I can't change that. You got to stay focused on reinforcing your support with your own voters and expanding that into other people. And by the way, it's a lot of noise. Trump, he was getting 22% were voting for Nikki Haley in Nebraska and Indiana in closed Republican primaries. I mean, there's a tendency, I think, Jen, and you know this from your time in the White House, to always focus on Dems in disarray, and Dems have problems. Why are Dems doing better? Well, it's not like they're doing all that great. And they got crazy candidates all over the country. Have you taken a look at the Arizona Republican Party lately? So, yes, I am, I don't say frustrated, and I do think the president has to deal, the age issue is suffocating him. And he needs to bring up that he's only 4 years older than Trump, and Trump had his goons steal his medical records out of his internist office in January 2017. So I've released all my medical records. Why don't you release the records that you had Keith Schiller steal from your internist? I mean, he's got to turn that around, and they need to quit arguing and complaining about the Times covering his age or the polling is so good. That's a waste of time. Don't do that. Talk about how you're going to change people's lives and make it better, and how you building a record to build on, and you understand cost of living, and you understand what families are going through. High insurance rates. It's pedestrian, but it's the stuff that wins elections.
Let me ask you, I mean, you've said this before, and this really struck a nerve with me, and I think with a lot of people. It's like there's so many negatives about Trump. It's hard to figure out for some people out there who want Biden to win or don't want Trump to win what the best negative is. I mean, Biden did what I thought was a good event in Wisconsin, where he went to Foxconn, where Trump had promised jobs, didn't deliver on the jobs. What do you think the best negative is? What's your gut on that?
Well, what I'd like from the White House is some guidance, some line of attack that they're going to unleash, because, come on, they're polling twice a week. And I've said that attacking Trump is like a mosquito in a nudist colony. I mean, there's just there's so much rightness to land on, but you have to pick one. And I'm not getting any guidance, on what is the thing that about Trump. It was the mismanagement of the pandemic, was the criminality on January 6th. It's the ongoing criminality. It is the fact that he's pulling for Russia. Is the fact that he publicly wants to destroy NATO. I don't know, but when there's so many, your cup runneth over and you can't drink anything out of it. So we do need some real focus on, hey, guys, this is the 2 or 3 things that matter the most to people. I suspect that cutting taxes for people over $400,000 is a good one. He's called for cutting Social Security and Medicare, and it's golden. We just need to block and tackle. We don't need to run triple reverses here.
Joining us now is Danya Perry. She is counsel for Michael Cohen in Trump's New York trial, and this is her first interview following Cohen's testimony. Danya, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you've spent the whole day in court, so I appreciate it. I just wanted to start by asking you, how is Michael Cohen feeling about his testimony now that his portion is wrapped?
Would you believe I haven't spoken with him since we walked out of that courtroom, and I'm going to try not to, and I'm certainly advising him to stay off of media and social media. I can tell you how I feel, which is not just relieved and exhausted, but good. I think it was a great day for the prosecution, and I think the sum total of the testimony, which was over 25 hours, I think, in the aggregate, I think it all went well, and as you point out, is just of a kind, of a piece with the rest of the testimony in this case. So to take your language, there's an old saw: if the facts are not on your side, pound the law. If the law is not on your side, pound the facts. If neither are on your side, pound the table. And I think we saw a lot of that from the defense over the course of the past week and change.
There was a fair amount of table pounding, including near the end of today, this afternoon, in this exchange between Robert Costello and Judge Merchan. What did you make of that? We know what their objective was, but what did you make of that and kind of the impact on the case?
Well, we had hightailed out of the courtroom and the courthouse by then. But from all accounts, look, this is also very much in line with what Michael has testified to and the reason why he did not trust Bob Costello. And so, as Judge Merchan apparently said at sidebar, the behavior bordered on contemptuous, legal term, and I think not overly surprising given what we've heard from the witness stand.
I mean, his objective, of course, was to add to the effort to discredit your client, Michael Cohen. Years ago, he waived his attorney-client privilege when it comes to Robert Costello. Do you regret that? Should he regret that?
I don't think there were any blows that landed. I think Michael testified exactly what that relationship was and why he stayed at arm's length from Bob Costello. And I think the jury saw that on full display today. So, no, I think Michael has been nothing but forthright with this prosecution team. Some of the, so-called aha or got you moments were given to the defense care of Michael Cohen. He is the one who first disclosed this Redfinch payment that you referenced in your opening. He disclosed that 4 years ago in his book. So there was no gotcha moment. He is the one who turned over his phone voluntarily to the DA's office, and that is where the defense got those, so-called, Clarence Darrow moment, text messages between Michael Cohen and Keith Schiller. So all of this has been, again, part and parcel of Michael Cohen providing information, trying to be cooperative, meeting with the DA's office dozens of times, as he testified to. And so I think all of this is very much in keeping with, the top line. And the takeaway here is that he has made his peace with his admittedly checkered past and has decided to turn his loyalties away from Mr. Trump and towards his family, his country, and to be cooperative and to be truthful as of the time he made that decision. And he was also truthful about the many lies and mistakes he's made along the way.
To your point, he kind of volunteered, even during testimony, he wasn't pushed terribly hard on some of the specifics, including the $30,000. You're a criminal defense lawyer. I want to ask you about some of their strategies here, because they never cross-examined Cohen about a lot of parts of his earlier testimony, including the crucial Trump Tower meeting, as well as his visit to the White House. Why do you think they skipped over all those topics?
Well, I want to first say hats off to the prosecution here. I thought Susan Hoffinger did a masterful job doing what we call drawing the sting and front-loading a lot of that damaging information. And so I think there were moments where Todd Blanche was a very old friend of mine, and so I'm not going to say much other than he probably felt there was only damage he could do by going back to it and revisiting it. And so I think there was that. And I think that they really didn't want to touch a lot of the substance. A lot of the cross-examination related to collateral matters that really had nothing to do with the core facts of this case and the core testimony from Mr. Cohen. And so it's, I think, what you described as distraction, noise. It's a sideshow, it's smoke and mirrors. It's what defense lawyers sometimes do, and I don't fault them for doing it. But they really didn't want to go too close to the actual facts and the testimony here, because as you pointed out, I don't know if it's 20 witnesses, I don't know how many witnesses corroborated, but it's any which way, both by documentary and testimonial evidence. And I think it was probably a smart move to stay away from a lot of that.
They did stay away from a lot. One of the things they focused a great deal of time on was this single phone call from October 24th of 2016, when they claim your client misremembered. And Michael Cohen testified that he spoke to Trump about Daniels, but the defense says that's a lie. Kind of feels to me like a small detail in a much larger fact pattern here. But do you think it was a strategic decision by the defense to kind of amplify this one phone call to try to make it into something bigger than it really is? Or why so much focus there?
Yeah, again, I don't fault them for that. It seemed like something where they could elicit, some inconsistencies or draw that out. And in fact, again, not a Perry Mason moment. This was a minute and 36-second conversation. The jury heard the recorded conversation about Karen McDougal, where the substantive portion was, a minute. And so a lot was accomplished, and several other topics of conversation were also discussed in that one short recording. And so, of course, the jury is going to be able to look at that and say, yeah, a lot can happen in 96 seconds. I mean, the prosecution could, it's kind of an old trick. They could just make the jury sit there silent for 96 seconds, and they'll see just how long that is. So I didn't think that was a great moment in a substantive way, but it's certainly, there's something to be said for courtroom theatrics and acting like you scored some big points. And look, the way some of the press reacted, people thought so just because there was that kind of performative energy. So again, I thought Todd Blanche did the best job that he could with what he had. And there was some baggage. There's no question. Whenever you have someone who's pled guilty as many times as he has, and who's admitted it as many times as he has, you're going to have some moments. But all in all, I didn't think that October 24th call, really was anything other than noise and a sideshow.
You kind of alluded to this in the baggage, and Michael Cohen has voluntarily put some things forward, some things he has been pushed on. I guess the big question here is, should the outcome of this case rest on Michael Cohen's credibility?
That's not for me to say, of course, and certainly not during the pendency of this trial. There's a very attentive, very smart jury. I've watched them keenly. They are paying very close attention, and they are not missing a beat here. So ultimately, of course, this will be in their hands as soon as next week, and they will decide.
Tanya Perry, I know you've had a long day. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen.
So we just heard a lot from Michael Cohen's lawyer, Tanya Perry, in her first interview since this trial began. And here to break it all down is former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner, and Christy Greenberg, who is the former deputy chief of the criminal division in the Southern District of New York. And she was at the courthouse today. So, Christy, let me start with you. We just heard Tanya Perry's take on her client's testimony over the last few days. What did you think? And anything she missed there in terms of good and bad moments?
Well, look, as Danya said, her client has baggage. He has enough baggage to fill JFK Airport. That said, I thought he did remarkably well. I think people were really concerned about his demeanor and how he would conduct himself on the stand. He was composed at all times. He was respectful. He never got rattled, and he was generally consistent, whether he was answering questions on direct or answering them on cross. I felt like he really owned the moments that he needed to own about prior pleas and prior conduct. And look, I thought on the whole, he was a real juxtaposition to, as you mentioned briefly, what we saw later today, which was Robert Costello take the stand and really just have a ton of antics. So that made Cohen seem all the more, steady, I think, in the eyes of this jury. He provided important testimony. He was corroborated in many respects, and his story generally makes sense and really fits with what the other witnesses have said and what the documents show. So I think overall it was a great job from the prosecutors.
We're going to come back to that moment because I know you were in the courtroom for it. But I do want to ask Glenn the question I asked Danya, and I understand why she didn't want to answer, which is just, if you're in this courtroom and you're the jury, I mean, how much of this is about Cohen's credibility? That seems to be a core part of the defense's strategy, is pulling it apart, which we all anticipated in advance of the trial.
Yeah, Michael Cohen is an essential witness. There's no two ways about it. And by all accounts, he, withstood something like 20 or 25 hours of cross-examination. And the reporting is that he never lost his cool.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought, I know you're going to talk about Bob Costello in a minute, but who would have thought another lawyer witness would all of a sudden make Michael Cohen look like the model of thoughtfulness and circumspection and decorum? And yet now the story has become Bob Costello, who, let's face it, is aligned with Trump and who the jurors will associate with Donald Trump. He played the fool in a way I've never seen a lawyer play. I've seen defendants do that on the stand. I've never seen a lawyer behave that way.
Yeah, I mean, this is an important point. Michael Cohen is not a quiet wallflower. Like, we've all met him and spent time with him, so his demeanor is interesting. All right, Christy, so you were in the room for the exchange, I believe, between Judge Merchan and Robert Costello at the end of the day today. It was dramatic to read. I mean, he cleared the courtroom. There was a lot of language I would use with my children. The big question to me is, was this all really worth it for the defense? I mean, they were trying to get him to discredit Cohen. So at the end of the day, was it worth it in your view?
No, it was incredibly stupid, because any concerns that these jurors may have had about Michael Cohen's credibility, I think, got lost and overshadowed by just how unprofessional and uncivil Bob Costello was to the judge. Juries tend to like the judge in this case, and Judge Merchan is, again, very civil, very respectful of their time. He has a very gentle way in speaking with this jury. I would expect that they like him quite a bit. And for this, for not only a lawyer who, as Glenn said, I agree, I haven't seen a lawyer behave like this on the stand, but to put a finer point on it, this is not just any lawyer. He actually was also the former deputy chief of the criminal division of the Southern District of New York, which was my old job and Danya's old job. So this is somebody who really should know better. And to see him act with such disrespect to the judge, you know, rolling his eyes, you know, saying ridiculous, absurd. At one point, he was trying to strike his own answers to questions when he was talking over the judge. It was just, it was a lot. And I'm sure the jury really picked up on it and really didn't like it. Now, this is what they're thinking about. No, they're not thinking about Michael Cohen anymore. They're thinking about this guy who, as Glenn said, they're going to associate with the defense. The defense chose to call him, and now he is their witness, and they have to deal with the consequences of that.
It's a certain irony that he discredited himself in his effort to discredit Michael Cohen. There's a lot packed in there. So let me ask you, I mean, there was, according to accounts of a number of people in the room, Todd Blanche was a little meandering. It kind of was all over the place. Now, the way that our colleague Rachel Maddow described it is like in the Great British Bake Off, where maybe you don't know all the ingredients and it's like all leading up to the closing statement, which means basically he needs to get these things in the record. But explain to me the strategy about being a little bit all over the place.
Yeah, so when I read Blanche's, the accounts of Blanche's cross-examination, what came to mind for me, now I was a career prosecutor. Prosecutors don't typically make particularly good criminal defense attorneys. Prosecutors deal in what is and what was. Criminal defense attorneys deal in what could have been, what might have been, what should have been. Let's engage in a little misdirection. And he came across as sort of a frustrated prosecutor. He didn't have a feel for cross-examination. I mean, cross-examination is generally about get in, make your three best points, and get out. When you go on cross-examining somebody for hours and hours and days, you've probably lost, particularly if the witness is performing well and the jury senses the frustration of the defense attorney, they're going to start siding with the witness. So I don't think he performed particularly well, and I think that's because he doesn't have a lot of experience as a criminal defense attorney.
Such an interesting thing. It was like apparently people shifting in their seats and things. I could talk to you guys for a lot longer, but we have to go to a break. So Christy Greenberg and Glenn Kirshner, thank you so much both for joining me this evening. I really appreciate it.